Hey there, Agile Extra Spicy Tamales, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bites, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner, day in and day out. Today's episode is called The Biggest Lie Your Developers Tell. And I use developers because I didn't want the title to be 50 words long, but there are other people connected with software development who sometimes are complicit in this lie as well. And that's what I want to talk about with you today. And I'm going to start by telling you a story about the most egregious version of this lie that I've seen, just so you kind of get an idea of what the impact of it is. And then we're going to walk it back and see how this lie shows up in kind of our day-to-day lives as we are building software or as you are having software built for you. So first, my story. This takes place a couple of years ago when a company that we work with got in touch with me and said, hey, we're working on a product for company X. It was an auction company. And they have a developer firm like yours. And the firm was a competitor of ours here in town, here in Kansas City. And he said, I would like for you to make a proposal to take the project, because I was talking to the person in this other company. I'm really trying hard not to say company names or people's names. I was talking to them, and when they bid the project, this auction company really wanted the software fast and cheap, which makes them the same as literally everyone else, right? Everyone wants that. And he said that this competitor firm of ours bid on this project and gave them that timeline and gave them that price. And in discussion with this third company later, this person revealed that the reason they did that was so they could get the work. They said they knew the project would take longer than that timeline and cost more than that price. But by the time they got to a time period where it would become a live issue, they would already have worked on this product for months. They would fill out change orders to, extend the timeline and extend the billing. And they're like, yeah, these people are not going to switch after I've already invested several months building their product. They're not going to go with somebody else just because I run overtime or run over budget. I think this is the most egregious version of the story, because here we had a person who knew that the time and cost estimate that they were giving was woefully unrealistic. They knew it on purpose, but they said it so that they would get the contract. And then once they got the contract, they felt like this other company would keep going with them. Like even when they were behind schedule, even though they had a cost overrun, it would be too much for the company to switch people mid-flight, so they would just keep using them until the product was built. For a company like mine, our name is Integrity Inspired Solutions. We tell prospective clients when their expectations are unrealistic in that way. So we would have lost that contract if we had gone head to head, because if you had two companies and one of them said, hey, your desired timeline and price point is not realistic for the size of thing you're wanting to build, and then you had another firm who said, yes, we can absolutely hit that time and hit that price point, who would you go with? Well, you would probably go with the second one, right? Because they can do it, even though they happen to be lying. The biggest lie that developers and cohorts tell you is, this is how long this will take, which is followed closely by the follow-up lie that is, we're still on track to finish on time. Those of you who maybe are in the audience who are project managers have probably heard that second one quite a bit, right? I remember, earlier on in my software development career, I learned that if a project manager or a manager in general asked you how far along something was, you always said it was 73%, because 73% is precise enough that they think it's real. It's far enough along that they feel like progress is being made. They feel like you're close, but not far enough that they're going to bug you about it tomorrow. And so everything was always 73% done. So maybe you're more familiar with that version of the lie. It's very similar, that the people who are building something or who you want to build something come back to you and say, this is how long this thing will take. And then the related observation, this is how much this thing will cost. So how do you know if you're being lied to by your developers or a contractor or a firm that you want to go with to build your software? Well, the obvious one is they miss the deadline, right? Like they tell you it's going to take a certain amount of time and it takes way more than that. They miss the deadline, you have cost overruns. That's very obvious. And this is more common than not. Any body of research that has been done around software development projects and their ability to come in at or below the projected time and cost reveals this to be abysmal, right? It just doesn't happen far, far, far more often than it does happen. If you ever keep track of the Chaos Report, every year they publish a report about the success of software projects. And yeah, as time has gone on and projects have gotten smaller and teams have become more agile, those statistics are improving, but they're not great. They're still not good. Far more projects overrun their projected time and budget than not, right? So it's a very common thing. It's an obvious way to tell that you're being lied to. Now, lying may be a bit strong of a word because most people, they don't intend to lie to you, but that is what happens. And we're going to unpack how that works. But before we get to that, I want to tell you some more signs you might look for that might not be as obvious. Are your developers working overtime? Okay, so that's a sign that you've been lied to about how long things are going to take, because otherwise they wouldn't need to. I remember I was in Chicago one time and I was talking to a director of project management out there, and I was talking about how often software projects overrun their time and cost. And she said, in my 13 years as a project manager, I've never had a project run over projected time. And I said, okay, did any of your people ever have to work overtime? And she was like, yeah. I said, okay, well, then, yeah, they did go over the projected time then, right? Because if you had the time right, that wouldn't have been necessary. You can make almost any timeline work, if people are willing to work 90-hour work weeks and forego showering and all those inconveniences that take up time we could be coding. Yeah, you can definitely hit your projected time when people are doing stuff like that. But if your developers are having to work overtime to meet the timeline, it was wrong. Having to cut a lot of scope near the end, specifically so you can get something out the door at the timeline. If you are cutting out testing or you have low to no testing, your developers aren't creating automated tests anymore, or maybe they never did to begin with in order to hit the time window. Or if you keep getting hit with change orders and extensions, especially if you've hired an outside firm to develop your software, and you're getting to a month or 2 weeks before the deadline and they're like, hey, we're looking at this and, it's going to be another 2 months and another, however many tens of thousands of dollars. And then those 2 months go by and it's like, hey, we're looking at this. Yeah, we're still about a month out, and that just kind of keeps happening and keeps happening. That's how you know that you're being lied to. As I said earlier, some people might take issue with the fact that I'm using the word lying. And I do want to be clear that when you talk to your in-house developers or when you talk to a consulting firm, they're probably not intentionally giving you false information, right? Like I told the story at the beginning of a competitor of ours who was knowingly giving false information and was trying to use it as a competitive advantage, I guess, as a sales tactic. That seemed to work great, actually. But that's not usually what happens. Like I said, that's the most egregious form of it. But I do think that when we're talking about how long will this take, how much will it cost, that people do intentionally agree to information that they are not certain about. They might think it's right, but they don't really have a basis for thinking that it's right. It's sort of like we all kind of have that friend who's a little too smart for their own good, right? That no matter what you're talking about, they know the answer, right? They may have never heard of the thing until you started talking about it, but they know the answer, right? And they will speak definitively on the topic. And then maybe you research it, maybe you don't, and come to find out your friend had no idea what they were talking about. But they would never give you that indication, right? It sounds like they know what they were talking about. They speak with confidence, but they never tell you, oh, by the way, I don't really know any of this. I'm just kind of making it up, right? I think these kinds of things happen when developers answer the question about how long things take. So how does that happen? If they're not deliberately trying to give you false information, then how does the lie actually work? Well, one thing is we have to understand we're just kind of bad at estimating things sometimes. I mean, we're bad at estimating how long a trip to the store will take us. And you're asking a team to estimate a year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe worth of work. What are the odds they're going to nail that, right? Pretty slim, right? Estimation by its nature is just very, very imprecise. And we're doing it at the time that we know the least about the product. Also, we have a tension between the need to lock things down and the need to be flexible, right? And this is the problem when we're talking about a very large project that, say, is a year and a half, 2 years, or perhaps even longer. In order for that timeline to work, nothing can really meaningfully change in those 2 years or 3 years or whatever. You kind of have to lock it down. You have to lock down the scope, right? And you can't really change the plan because any meaningful change is going to alter the timeline and what you were told is going to be wrong, right? But at the same time, virtually every software project needs the ability to change, especially if you are building this thing over the course of a couple of years. Changes are just going to happen and you need to allow for that flexibility. But if you allow for flexibility, now you've put your plan in jeopardy, right? So the tension between those two things is sometimes how the lie happens. Another reason it happens is just optimism, right? A lot of developer teams, they know they're smart, they know they're good, they're feeling pretty good. And when you lay something out and you say, hey, you think we can get this done in a year? They'll look at it and go, yeah, of course. We're being optimistic. Or they're thinking about like ideal days, right? Like, yeah, if I code this for 8 hours a day for the next year, yeah, we can probably do that, even though, of course, those days don't happen. We're optimistic. Maybe your team is being pressured to agree to that timeline or to set a timeline. Maybe you have put out there that if we can't hit this timeline, then we're not going to select you for this project, or this project isn't worth doing, or it's not worth paying a team of this size if we can't be meeting these timelines. So there's external pressure to agree to this information, to even potentially lie to you about what those timelines are. And then finally, this one I think is kind of interesting, and I don't see a lot of people talking about this, is that time as a resource is kind of amorphous, right? Because when we think about time, we think about all the different things we could pack into time, and it doesn't have a hard boundary that's easy for us to think about. So when I think about what I can get done in 2 years, I mean, 2 years is a pretty long time, right? I mean, in a year, like someone could injure themselves, could get married, could change jobs, could convert to a different religion. There's all kinds of things, huge things that can happen to an individual in a year, right? Much less 2 years. And so if you're saying, hey, can you guys get this done in 2 years? That's such an amorphous quantity that it's kind of hard to say no, right? With any definitive, because you're just thinking about, I just have this massive bag of time. Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, we could probably do that, right? It's just hard to quantify. Think of if I asked you about money. Like, let's say I gave you $10,000 and I said, hey, at the end of the week, I want you to give me my $10,000 back. And you said, okay, I don't know why we're doing this, but let's say we're doing that. So I give you $10,000. And then halfway through the week, I said, I'm going to need you to squeeze another couple of thousand in there before you give it back to me. You would say, no, I can't. You gave me $10,000. You didn't give me $12,000. You gave me $10,000. So no, I can't give you back $12,000. That would be impossible. I don't have a sufficient quantity of dollars to be able to do that. You only gave me this much. But when it comes to time, we do stuff like this constantly, right? We talk to the business and we say, okay, here's our roadmap for the next 6 months. We think we can do it. And then in month 3, somebody says, oh, do you think you could stick in this report? Or, oh, do you think you could get these bug fixes done too? Oh, do you think you could throw this other client in? And we're like, yeah, sure. We would never do that with a hard quantifiable resource, but we do it with time constantly. It's just an amorphous entity, and it's really easy for us to be fuzzy about and just kind of stick things in there and think that we have that time to spend to get those things done. So we've talked about signs that you've been lied to. We've talked about how these lies come about, but why? Why do developers do it? Why don't developer teams always tell you, like, your timeline is unrealistic? Or when a firm is trying to win your business, why don't they tell you, no, I'm sorry, the price point you want just isn't going to work. It's going to take way more time than that. Why do you not get that consistent message? Well, there's a few reasons. One is to make you happy, right? Developers don't want to tell you that your timeline is unrealistic. That is bad news. And I hope you heard the capital B and the capital N when I said that. That is bad news. And developers don't want to tell you that. They want you to be happy. They want meetings with you to go well, or at least be over soon. And so they want to tell you what you want to hear, right? They want you to be happy. They don't want to say, actually, the more I think about it, I don't think we can get this done in 2 years. I just don't think that's realistic. We need to tag on at least another 6 months for buffer or something like that. Nobody wants to have that conversation with you. They want you to be happy. They want management to be happy. And the reason that they skew that way often is because deep down, they have a fear that if they do tell you the truth, then they won't keep their job. Or if they're an outside firm like us, they won't win your contract. They won't win that work. If they are truly honest with you about how long things will take or how much they're going to cost. And we have sort of created this culture in software development. It's one of the dysfunctions that my company specifically was built to counteract, because this is a common cultural thing that happens. If developers can't meet the timeline that the business imposes, then they feel like their jobs are at risk, right? Or if I'm trying to win your business and you say, hey, we got to get this done by September, and I say, hey, I'm running my projections and it looks like we're going to get done 6 months later than that, you won't give me that contract, right? That's just sort of a cultural thing. It's fear. Another reason is sometimes this even gets down to our very sense of identity, right? Like if I were a good developer, or if our team was a good development team, we should be able to hit that deadline, right? And so now we're talking about my own sense of identity as a developer. And a lot of times in developer culture, we have kind of a hero culture, kind of a save the day culture, kind of a fireman busting through the door to get the family out and then putting out the fire kind of culture. We reward that. We admire that. We talk about that developer who stayed up till 3 a.m. to get that bug fixed, right? We talk about that development team that put in 70-hour weeks to make sure, we hit our marketing window for the software. We valorize it. So sometimes when developers are thinking about timeline, they want to tell you something unrealistic because it's really getting to the heart of the way they see themselves as professionals. It's not heroic to say, I'm not going in that burning building because I'll probably die. That's not what heroes say. Heroes say, suit up. I'm going into that burning building no matter how bad it looks, right? And in developer culture, we want to be the hero. And so we agree to things that ultimately will probably trap us and do us in. So at this point, I hope you recognize what I'm talking about. Many of you, I'm sure, have had projects that have gone this way, have been on teams or have worked with teams. And this is exactly what has happened. It's far more common than not, like I said. So with that in mind, are there things we can do to prevent being lied to? I think the biggest thing you can do is, instead of planning your software as a full product that could possibly span 2 or 3 years, plan software as a valuable product increment, right? Do small batch planning, small batch funding, small batch forecasting. We talk about MVPs here on the show. We talk about small batch units all the time. Think about your product like that. Instead of asking a team, how long is it going to take to build this whole thing? Or instead of asking a third-party contracting firm, how long is it going to take to build my e-commerce platform? Work with them to figure out the next most valuable increment and get time ideas, price ideas around that, right? And just that shift, making the projects far, far smaller and far leaner, will go a long way to having more realistic ideas about timeline and budget. Another way you can prevent it is to use actual data for the timelines. A lot of times what we use are people's feelings, right? I hear this a lot. Organizations will tell me our development team keeps missing deadlines, but they're the ones that gave us those deadlines, right? They set the deadlines themselves and they still can't hit it. That's because most development teams are just going off of what they think, right? They're just telling you how long they think it's going to take. They're just going with their gut feel, maybe thinking about other things they think were kind of similar, and giving you an end result, but no data ever enters into the conversation. The more we can bring data into that conversation, then the more likely we are to have to confront reality, which may not fit how fast we think we are or how fast we wish we were. By the way, story point velocity, not data. You cannot make plans for the future based on story point velocity. That is not the kind of thing I'm talking about. I'm talking about things like your throughput data is the main thing, but also things like cycle time, how much work you have in progress at any given time, those kinds of things. But I think probably the most important thing you can do is not so much a technique as it is a mind and culture shift. And that is to value people telling you the truth, not telling you what you want to hear. And that's hard because we all want to hear what we want to hear. And as I said before, when we look at people wanting you to be happy, they want to please you, if they're afraid that they might not keep your business or they might lose your job, or they have a strong ego, they have a strong sense of identity, they are motivated to tell you what you want to hear. They are not motivated to tell you the truth. And a lot of times people who tell the truth in our organizations, they get penalized for that, right? Whereas people who don't tell us the truth and then work their butts off to make it a reality, they get rewarded for that. We really need a culture where we value people telling us the truth, not telling us what we want to hear. If you need software built and you are going out to different firms and 3 of them say they can hit your timeline, and then you have a 4th firm that says, hey, we've been running some projections against your timeline and it's just not very realistic. It's quite unrealistic, actually. This would be a much more realistic timeline, and they tell you. You should value that conversation very highly because that firm knows they're not going to get your business, but they're telling you the truth. And you need to value a firm that tells you the truth. You need to value developers who tell you the truth. When you go to your team and you ask for an estimate, the thing you want out of that conversation should not be an affirmation that they can hit your timeline. The thing that you want out of that conversation is the truth. The thing that you want out of that conversation is reality. And if the reality is that timeline is not likely to be hit, you need to hear that. It's what's best for you. It's what's best for your organization. And organizations need to reward that behavior, not reward the behavior of people telling you whatever you come up with and then killing themselves to try to make that vision happen. So I hope this helps somewhat. I realize that I kind of hit this topic at a high level. Other podcast episodes, we've dug a little bit deeper into things like how we can do good forecasts and how we can do good MVPs, to create tiny product increments and things like that. But I just wanted to address this at a high level because it is a real business problem. And this is a great episode to share with like your project managers or your product managers or people who have to deal with developer teams and their timelines, because this is just such a common phenomenon. And your developer teams just want to make you happy and they just want to keep their jobs, right? So they have an instinctive motivation to comply, to tell you what you want to hear. But you really want to be aware of the signs that you're being told what you want to hear and why you're being told what you want to hear, and encourage your developers that they don't have to do that and they don't need to be afraid of doing that. And you will get much, much better forecasts and in the long run, better product planning as a result. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.